Okay, this might be a bit of a quick one because there's supposed to be people coming to the cafe at 8:30, which is not so long away. I'm also not sure if how much we can hear the rain, but I guess we'll find out. But I also want to show my handmade ham and cheese scroll. The ham is made with wild boar. It doesn't look that good, but it's fucking delicious. Made the ham as well from the wild boar. Just gotta get on to making cheese. Make everything. That's probably a good place to start actually, because what I was gonna talk about today was this idea of technology and consciousness technology, how consciousness and technology are connected or related. But a good place to start could be that for me personally, when I make things, it's like a way of reflecting myself into the world and cultivating something on the inside, which I think should be true for everyone, especially people who make things. But I'm not sure that it is, or that everyone recognizes it. But it comes back to this idea of having like a craft or a trade and doing work not being like a minus. Like in the modern age or whatever, it's like the goal is to do as little as possible and have as much money as possible and as much time as possible. But then there's this big gap where there's not a sense of fulfillment because people aren't doing things that satisfy them. And I think, like I was talking about in the last video, that's to do with seeing the reflection of yourself in the world develop. And we were talking about, how to know what you need and how to get the tools that you need to kind of build the life that you want and need, or build the experiences that you need to have to be yourself, to become yourself, kind of. And that is also intertwined with this idea of technology, which for me is kind of like an interplay between consciousness and materiality. Even if you think about it in terms of basic and physical technologies like a bike, or a car, or physical tools like a chisel or a hammer. They've been developed through conscious recognition of what the work is doing and how it could be done more efficiently, basically. But in kind of mysticism and spiritual work, it's more like building the technology inside, in the consciousness and in your field, without really needing to build it into the make a physical object necessarily. And in a way, it's almost like the physical technology is like, obviously it's a step towards, it's part of evolution towards higher technology. But it's also kind of like a block to the internal side of the technology. if only because it's so easy to fixate on the object. And we're seeing this with the internet is a good recent example. You know, it's the whole point of the internet is to promote connectivity and connect everyone in the world. You can have immediate connection with everyone in the world. But people are getting more and more disconnected because they're not connecting to real connectivity. You know, they've lost sight of what communication is really about and are just gorging themselves on information. I mean, it's the same with, you know, not just communication between people, like social media or whatever, but, you know, like practical information as well. Having all the information in the world at our fingertips kind of highlights what it is we can't get from the internet. So there's kind of like a paradoxical or like double-edged quality to technology in that way. But what I'm talking about is, say the person or the people who developed the internet or people who developed hand tools or wheels or carts or bicycles. They're people who are able to bring a new form into the world because of the way that the world and processes in the world reflected in their consciousness. You know, when you observe the world and see the way it is and see the way that it could be, you're kind of already starting to produce a new version of reality. And then bring that into the way you deal with reality, the way that you can improve your material environment. But I think we can go further with this and not just be developing technologies. Like, there's this whole tech boom, you know, tech startup boom happening, and AI boom happening. And everyone's jumping on the bandwagon of this specific type of technology. Whereas what I think the real or better use of consciousness, individual consciousness, is to bring the innovation to the world that only you can bring to the world. Which maybe wasn't possible necessarily back in the day when people just didn't have anything and it was a huge revolution to just have a hammer or something. Or like a horse-drawn cart, you know, like a plow or a hoe or something, that just make farming that much easier and more efficient. But I think, from what I understand, everyone has a unique quality of consciousness, and so should be reflecting, you know, interpreting and understanding the world in a different way, in a different arrangement and structure. And that's why we have conflicts and difficulties, is because we're just seeing different versions of things, which is fine and great, and conflict is part of the way that we develop and evolve. So, you know, live with it. But I think the nature of that difference, or the purpose of that difference, that fundamental difference, is that if you develop that quality it becomes a new technology. And I'm not talking about developing a new device or product. I'm talking about developing a new way of being at a high enough level that it becomes a technology. What a technology is really is a way of making things more efficient or more higher functioning. So what is a technology? Because I think most people think of computers and wires and chips and, the most obvious examples of what we refer to as technology. And there probably is, because those things are new. They're the most things, they stand out because we recognize them as being new or recent developments on the processes that we use to manage life and manage the things that we're doing with our time here. And that's great. And if we take steps backwards through technology, like say back to steam engines and then further back to more like manual technologies like levers and horse and cart and houses even, they're processes and objects and systems that make things more efficient, make us able to do things in a better way, more quickly with less effort, or to a higher standard. And so the question kind of becomes, what is not a technology? Because everything is a process, really. Like the body is a set of processes, walking is a process, eating is a process, a tree is kind of a process. It becomes hard to think of something that is not a process. And when you improve a process, it is more or less a technology. And so it becomes kind of more interesting to think about things that are improving our lives or managing our lives in ways that are not so obvious or do not stand out so much. Like psychology, psychoanalysis is a technology. Philosophy and the ideas that are developed in philosophy are technologies because they get installed in you. If you read a philosophy book, it installs new perspectives in you that allow you to deal with life in a more efficient or dynamic way, a deeper way, a broader view. I mean, even reading a novel is doing the same thing. It's installing ideas in you. Watching this video right now, hopefully, is installing new ideas in you. And every idea has an effect on the way that you manage life, the way that you view life and interpret life, and then respond to life. And, unfortunately, there's a huge amount of media content out there that is not really offering anything particularly new, but it still is doing something to you. NLP is also referred to as a technology. And thinking about it this way shows that there are threads throughout history of approaching technology this way and of approaching consciousness and humanity in this way. And if you really want to dig deep, you can see that the body develops over time, and we don't necessarily have concrete answers for what drives or makes decisions across evolution. But that's probably a conversation for another time. But the functions in the body, it is a system, and it can be treated like a technology. And we can see, if you subscribe to evolution as an explanation of how we achieved this biodiversity, then you can see that different organisms have developed differently to perform different functions in the environment. And even, different countries have developed differently, and different people are different. We're all different from each other. And I just really don't see a difference between biology and what we generally refer to as technology, because they're all just functions. And if anything, the internal technology of the body, and especially of human consciousness and intelligence, is a lot more adaptable and dynamic than any specific, any given technology. And we can even see technologies as a whole as an extension of the internal human technology. And I think it's better to see it that way, because if you get stuck on a specific technology, it gets stagnant really quickly. Like, we're kind of stuck on digital technologies at the moment, and smartphones and social media and AI are kind of dominating everything. There's just so much more to be explored. You can see how the world is suffering because of the excessive streamlining of not just technology, but like social life, economic life, work life, education. Everything's been put into these really narrow channels, and they can't breathe. They can't develop in new directions like they should be able to, like an organism can. And what I think we need to do is bring the emphasis back to not even necessarily the physical organism, but the internal potential as the root of technology, and still develop physical technologies and conceptual technologies. But if we lose touch with the root of the technology, which is effectively consciousness, and the potential, the infinite potential of consciousness, and the radical diversity in manifestations or expressions of consciousness between different people, we're going to get stuck and hit the same blocks over and over again. And it's probably too much right now to talk about how to develop the consciousness technology, or like the individual potential, individual ability, or we could call it talent or genius that each person has. And that's kind of what we'll be unpacking over the course of this series in an ongoing way. And in the work I'm doing with other people too, like collaborations and one-on-one sessions with people to explore different ways that consciousness is manifesting. Because it manifests in everything that you do. All the little quirks, the little interests, and the disposition we have to, certain skills or occupations or situations, positive and negative. They're all interconnected back to this common core of the core potential of what you could be at your highest state in your lifetime. And part of why we often talk about clearing away excess baggage is so that that core can then be expanded and become a technology. And I think people who are highly successful, that's what they're doing. They're aligning all the tools in their life, all the things they need, all the functions to enhance their core potential and find ways to bring it into the world. In ways that can work with the world, and in other words, improve the world, benefit the world. But long story short, the consciousness and the kind of like foundation or essence of your being has to be exposed to the world in order to have a more direct interplay with world, reality, like world situations, like real experience, interact with what is happening right now. But most people live so closed off from reality. And I don't mean that, you're sticking your head in the sand or hiding or avoiding, although there are usually functions in the psyche that are effectively avoiding experience. And I don't mean that people aren't seeing reality, but the things that we tend to attach to, and build these structures around that make our lives feel more stable and manageable. Of course, we do need them to feel stable and manageable, and that is part of self-development and spiritual practice as well. Because it's just a lot harder to move forward if you don't feel stable at all. But there's a limit to how far you can go without breaking down some of the boundaries or structures that you live by, because they're almost necessarily set up by some situations that are no longer relevant with structures that are not going to benefit you. And the more narrow your reference framework is, and the more narrow your kind of sense of world is, like if you believe you have to stay in your job, or if you believe that your work life and your social life are, and I mean even what you see on the news, if that's the limit of what you think is going on, your ability to move and grow and develop is going to be that much more limited as well. And the more limited it is, the harder it is to gain real experience and real growth where you need it, which is at the deeper layers of who you are, to develop something that is really going to fulfill you. Because the fulfillment is in seeing how much of your potential you can really fulfill. That you can really bring into manifestation in the world. And I don't mean manifestation in a hippie way. I mean working and building something into the material makeup of the world around you. It could still be within just doing your job really well. But what's important is that you do it as you, and that you're not just performing functions out there. It's important for the internal functions to develop, and that be what acts upon the world. But most people have this shut off internal life, and probably things that you could never tell anyone, some things you could never even acknowledge to yourself. And then there's the external world where you play by the rules or play along and just do what you need to do in order to get by, so that you can maintain the separation and not have to deal with the stuff that's going on inside. And I think everyone can think of numerous examples of people who get to 50, 60, 70 and have never dealt with that stuff, have never really been able to open up the treasure chest of potential and be vulnerable and really grow from a deep place And those people are stunted and fearful and bitter. And this is not a judgment, but I just feel there could be so much more in life for them and for everyone. You know, was it worth it feeling safe within those walls? If that's the outcome. Like, is just a short-term sense of safety really worth being at the end of your life and looking back and knowing that you could have been more? Some David Goggins shit right there. Well, but that is a question. Let me know what you think. I mean, safe spaces has been a pretty big topic in the last 10 years, and doesn't seem like it's about to be resolved in the public discourse. But yeah, I will just say that the real safety is in growing and developing and becoming able and being prepared and being proficient in things that matter and not in just avoiding danger, whatever that is. Because wherever you draw the line of what is safe and what is dangerous is relative anyway. And if you emphasize safety, the line gets more and more narrow. You know, the area that you need to feel safe gets more and more narrow rather than more and more expanded. The potential for your true value to come out and grow and develop, and you know, like a living thing, it has to exchange with the environment in order to grow and bloom. Your ability to really tap into that technology becomes more and more limited. So what we want to do is expand the circle of what feels safe. You know, I mean, this is what they're talking about with comfort zone. Expand that zone so that you're more safe. The more you engage with danger, the less dangerous things there are in your world. How about that?